Hey guys, I'm Elizabeth McCravey, a website designer and business coach for entrepreneurs and your host for the Breakthrough Brand podcast, the show that's all about pulling back the curtain on how to actually build a successful business. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want a deep dive into the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to run a successful business and stand out in a crowd, you're in the right place. After creating a multiple six-figure-a-year website design business in my 20s, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning because I believe the keys to building a thriving business should never be a secret. Here you'll find episodes that are actionable, direct, and fun, like friends chatting business over coffee, and a fresh, honest take on the reality of being an entrepreneur. If you're ready to master online marketing, branding, website design, mindset, and business strategy, then this is the podcast for you. It's time to build your breakthrough brand. Let's do this. As you think about starting a podcast, you might have hesitations and questions like, do I have time for it? Who am I to start a podcast? Do I have anything to say that people would actually want to hear? Is the tech going to overwhelm me too much? Will I even enjoy podcasting? What if I quit and people see me as a failure? How will people even find my podcast? Am I articulate enough to do a voice-only medium? Am I making the right choice on the tech I'm considering buying and the hosting platform I'm choosing? That's a lot of things, but then you also may decide that you can't do it because you're thinking thoughts like, I'm afraid no one will listen, I'll be embarrassed. I'm afraid people will judge me thinking I think I'm someone special to do this. I have too much imposter syndrome to start. Maybe you feel I'm not good at talking because of my accent or English not being my first language. I'm worried about the time management as a busy mom. I'm worried I'll overthink everything and never get content out there or want to delete stuff after I record it. And you're overwhelmed by making the right choices if you're going to invest your time into doing that. And I just said a lot of things there, but these are actually all real people's hesitations around starting a podcast that came straight from the people who filled out my interest survey for my new course. And these are also 1000% some of the things I personally felt when I started my own podcast 4.5 years ago. So if you're feeling any of those things, I just want to say you are not alone. And it was actually really interesting to me as I've read over, literally just read through every single survey result to see actually how much of the same things were repeated on the survey, especially worries about the time management of a podcast and worries about no one listening to your podcast. So just know if you have any of those fears, they are also felt by other people. And if you're feeling any of these fears today, while also feeling drawn to starting a podcast, I have some major encouragement for you today. And I also have some extremely practical advice. So I really hope this episode uplifts you and gives you belief in yourself and in your abilities if you do feel that pull towards podcasting. So let's get into it. First I'm going to start with the encouragement. I have a few different encouragement points, and then we're going to get to the practical advice. Before we start, I want to say if you're hearing this live, then my new course, Podcast Success Blueprint, is open for enrollment, which is so fun to say. I'm so glad it's here. And it's beta launch time, which means you can join right now as a founding member of this program, but just for a limited time. There's a limited time discount and bonuses for joining early. And this is actually my second time doing a beta launch for a course. And you can ask anyone who joined Book.Designer during that beta launch in 2021, and they'll tell you it was an amazing decision for their business. So I want to give you a quick little scoop on what the course is all about if you haven't heard me talk about it yet. So the Podcast Success Blueprint is a comprehensive course with everything you need to start, scale, and streamline your podcast like a pro. And my goal with the course is to help you turn your podcast into an effective, profitable marketing tool for your business. And also have it be something you find joy and fulfillment in and does not take up all of your time and energy, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about in today's episode too. So this is an 8-module course that starts with stuff for beginners, but then gets into scaling aspects that even seasoned podcasters will find new and inspiring. I'm teaching things like how to start your podcast, like picking your topic, your name, your niche, and your show purpose and the tech of it all, organizing your podcast for success and ease with an option to add on ClickUp and Notion templates to go with it. And then all things solo episodes, all things interviews, and then marketing your podcast in post-production, how to make money podcasting. If you missed last week's episode, definitely go listen to that. I talk about some of those ways you can make money from your podcast there. And then I talk about podcast team. We have a whole module on that of building out your podcast support team of people to help you as you do your show. And then there's a bonus module as well about being guests on other shows. So as a founding member, you're buying before the course is done, and it'll be done within a few months. But by buying early, you're getting serious price savings and 2 group coaching calls with me. So go to elizabethmccravey.com/PSB, short for Podcast Success Blueprint. You can also just go to my homepage and find it from there. But you can do that to join the course right now. And I seriously hope you will consider this, especially as you listen to this episode. Consider if this is the right time for you for this, because I would love to help you start or scale your podcast. Now, let's get into the stuff around like, do you have what it takes to start and scale a podcast? Is this the right fit for you? So I'll start with the encouragement and then end with the practical. Okay, so the first piece of encouragement. When you start a podcast, you are literally creating your own stage, which is a really huge deal, and it's scary. So think about it. Besides things like YouTube, there's no other type of consistent content creation where you are putting yourself out there as much as you are with podcasting. And often your podcast eventually ends up on places like YouTube or in other video formats. So really you're doing both. And you're not just putting your thoughts out there in a reel or in an Instagram post. You're not just writing your thoughts in an email or in a blog post. And you're also not just sharing your thoughts one time on someone else's podcast or at an event or in a summit. You are literally bringing your voice to whoever wants to listen. You have no control over who's listening, consistently at whatever consistency you decide to go at on your show. And that's a really big deal. And that's why this feels like a bigger deal than it probably felt like for you when you did your first Instagram post or when you decided to like start blogging on your website. It actually is a bigger deal. So you're not crazy if podcasting feels scary to you and feels like, oh my gosh, it's this huge undertaking. I'm really putting myself out there. You are, because you are building your own stage, and that is scary. You can worry if anyone will listen, if someone will disagree with you and then not like you anymore. I've definitely had that fear. And if people will think you're so smart and you're so cool and so talented and so great at whatever it is you do because you started a show. So let's talk about some truths with this though. I believe that in order to grow your business, you have to create your own stage. And your stage can be you recording yourself on your phone for an Instagram story. It can be YouTube. It can be blogging. It can be a consistent email newsletter. It can also be something like a podcast. But you cannot hide forever in your business and expect your business to also grow. And I am a bit biased, as you can imagine, but I really believe that podcasting is one of the best stages you can build when we look at, and you can obviously do all the other ones too, but when we look at like what makes most sense for business growth and sustainability over time, podcasting is really great for it because it's an easier medium than other things like YouTube that require video. But it's also more engaging and connecting than things like just writing, like on a blog. People will truly get to know you as they take you with them in their car, in their home, and just all over their lives. So it's a very big connection point. So that's just the first piece of encouragement for you is like, if it feels scary, it's because it's a really big deal. And I want you to think through that mentality of that you're creating your own stage, and that's huge. And so it's okay to be a little nervous as you do it, but just because something feels scary does not mean you shouldn't do it. Second thing I want to tell you about is that I was super embarrassed to tell other business owner friends that I wanted to start, and even real life friends who are not business owners as well, but that I wanted to start a podcast back in 2018 when I started thinking about it. And I procrastinated starting a lot because I was so intimidated by it. I thought podcasting was like only for the big names like Jenna Kutcher or Amy Porterfield or like NPR. So I'm like, who am I to like think I should do this as well? And here are a few things specifically that I like when I look back at that time, and I actually watched some old videos from that time the other day that helps me be like, oh yeah, like getting in that headspace again of what that felt like. But here are some things that were helpful to me that I think would also help you. But these are things that helped me with the imposter syndrome. And then again, I'm going to get into some other fears you might have. So I made a point to write down all my episode ideas anytime I thought of some before I ever started my show, which that gave me the confidence to believe I had something to say. I actually remember going to a mastermind retreat. It would have been either in 2018 or 2019, like either end of year or beginning of the year. But I drove there, it was in Florida. And on the drive there, I actually used the voice notes app on my phone and recorded some episode ideas. It was like I was like pretend recording a podcast. And of course I didn't air it that way, but that was a way for me to like get started with this and like show myself even that like I have the confidence of something to say. Another thing I did is I did ask some specific trusted business friends what they thought about the idea of me starting a podcast. And what I'll say about this is that ideas are fragile when they're so new. So I would be cautious about this. I know Sarah Blakely, who you guys, if you know me, you know I just love her. She talks often about how she didn't tell anyone she knew in real life about her Spanx idea for a while because the dream of starting Spanx felt so fragile to her and the idea felt really fragile. And she didn't want it to be crushed by someone's unintended negative comment about it. So if you feel like your idea is too fragile, just be careful who you trust it with. And when you decide to share it, you want to be really deliberate about that. So, but I did that. I asked some specific friends hey, what do you think about this idea? And I was met with some mostly positivity, at least in my own memory about it. Another thing I did, I bought my equipment. I outlined my first episode and I recorded it. And it is such a fun memory when I think back on that time. But my friend Jenna and I did a business retreat together in an Airbnb outside of Nashville. It was back in 2018. And we did kind of in the winter, and we just had a few days there, just the two of us working on our businesses. And it was so fun. And we were both new podcasters then. And we were always doing stuff together back then when we both had businesses like that. And on that retreat, I brought my equipment with me. And of course I had my laptop, and I can literally visualize it now in this kind of old Nashville, historic-y Airbnb home. But I sat in front of a window in my room in the Airbnb, and I recorded the episode with her in the other room doing her own thing. But even just having her there on that trip with me, being someone who was encouraging me that hey, you do have what it takes, was huge. And I remember I wasn't even planning on that retreat actually recording any episodes, but then she was like, Elizabeth, you brought your mic. You already have 3 episodes outlined. What are you doing? You need to record this. So she was a big encouragement for me there. So you might need that as well. And then the last thing I'll say that was really helpful for my imposter syndrome was working on trust with yourself and getting okay and comfortable with the idea of not working, something you try not working out and that being okay. And I've had many points now in my business where that's been the case. And I was not always comfortable with that being a possibility though. And I would say back when I started my podcast, that was a growing thing for me of okay, can I be okay with trusting myself that this is still a good idea if it doesn't work out? There's still fruit in it if it doesn't. And I would say too, just starting my podcast for me was a huge growth thing for me as a person, of learning to trust myself and building confidence. So anyway, those are some things that helped me. And that's I guess the reason I put this as an encouragement one is just because if you feel embarrassed to say out loud that you want to start a podcast, or maybe it's something else for you, maybe it's YouTube or even starting a business for the first time, just know you're not alone. And a lot of people start at that place, and it's just about doing it scared. Okay, my third piece of encouragement for you and final piece before we get into those specific fears is that the result might just be worth the imposter syndrome, the time commitment, and the risk of starting a podcast. And you really just won't know until you try. And I know there are so many of you, because I've been messaging with you on Instagram, where it's you do feel that pull towards podcasting, but you're you feel imposter syndrome, you don't know if you have time, and it feels risky. It's a time commitment, it's some work to get started, it's a lot of brain power, even just thinking of a name for it, but you will not know until you try. And when I think about how my podcast has impacted me personally, not just in my business, it has taught me to trust myself and given me a new level of confidence that I did not previously have. And I think that would be helpful for you as well. So I'm literally a different person than I was back then. And this podcast is one of the ways I've grown emotionally, spiritually, and as a business owner as well. So really the point is that you won't know until you try. I also want to say you might be someone who is just drawn to podcasting. I absolutely was. And let me tell you a little bit about that. So I've told this story before in the podcast, but before I had a podcast, I was blogging consistently for a few years. And I actually would record my blog posts just with my Apple headphones, no mic, no nothing. Sometimes even walking outside, the audio quality was not great, but I would record my blogs and put them on SoundCloud. And then I was embedding those into my blog posts because I was finding myself writing these blog posts and then feeling I wanted use my own voice with it. I have more to say than what I typed out. And I want people to be able to listen to it instead of just sitting and reading, especially when they were longer blog posts. So that was me being drawn to podcasting before I even started. It was me wanting to talk and not just write. And another thing that would happen to me that still happens to me now is that I will listen to other shows and think they're awesome. No, being oh, I don't like that show or anything. But I listen to other shows and I would think of things I would want to add to what they said. It's I want to continue the conversation from what I'm hearing. Or I would hear something and be oh, I want to say that differently. Or I would hear something and be oh, I could do an episode on that topic and here's how I would frame that. So those were things that were happening in my mind all the time as someone who was listening to podcasts but did not have one. So if that's also you, if you're feeling any of those things, then you might have that same draw towards podcasting. That means that you have something to share and that you should go get started and do some sharing and get started with the podcast. So now let's talk about some specific fears though that you might have around starting a podcast and how to overcome them. And these are all fears, again, based on that survey. I have 4 specifically that I'm going to walk through, but I think these will be helpful to you just to think about like, okay, let's put these fears in perspective. They're all real fears. They're fears for a reason, but like, how can we overcome them? So the first fear, you're afraid that you will not love podcasting. You won't have time to do it forever. And you'll be embarrassed if you end up starting it and then quitting on your show. Because let's be real, like when we launch a podcast, typically people make a really big deal out of it. And you might feel embarrassed that it's like, okay, 10 episodes in, you're being like, okay, I'm hoping no one notices that like now I'm not putting out episodes anymore. So let's talk through these though. The first thing to know, you will probably not podcast forever. So I would just go ahead and forget that level of commitment of like thinking that this is something you have to do for the rest of your life. If you have the desire and the dream for it and you're seeing clear ways that could help you in your business, then commit to trying at least, or else you will just never know. Like this is one of those things where you have to try it or you'll never know. It's just like how you had to start your business or you'd never know unless you tried it. Same way with podcasting. And something I really love that I'm going to actually be teaching in my course is I love the concept of the 6-episode commitment and then going from there. This is something Tim Ferriss teaches. And when I heard him talk about it the first time, I was just like, yes, more people need to see it this way. So recording 6 episodes, putting them out there, week by week or whatever frequency, and then decide from there. Decide if you liked it. You can analyze, do I like it? What don't I like? What do I like? What can I change to make this work better for me? So just let go of it being a forever commitment aspect. And I also want to add that in my new course, I'm teaching things that will help you love it because I'm teaching stuff that overcomes those hurdles and will help show you what there is for you to talk about and teach within your niche. So we're kind of overcoming the hurdles that might make it where you don't love it. And then I'm saying on the time commitment thing, just like you don't have to do it forever. I also think that sometimes buying something like a course on podcasting or joining a group for podcasters, or even just starting by buying your equipment, whatever it is, but stepping into that identity with a purchase can help you be more likely to stick it out and to even get started in the first place. Like for me, it was like when I bought my mic, it was like, okay, I'm really doing this thing and I'm excited about it. And now I like have the stuff to like get rolling with it. And that felt really good and helped me at least with the getting started. The sticking with it long-term thing might be a bit different. But I do think like having a course and like a mentor and someone to guide you along in the process is going to be hugely helpful. And that's what I want to do inside Podcast Success Blueprint. Okay, so that's the first fear and how to overcome it. Now let's talk about another one. You're worried that you'll make the wrong decision on something early on and then it'll be a mess to fix it later. So the thing I want you to know when you think about your podcast, and if you've been in business any amount of time, you know this already, but every decision you make is changeable. If you buy a mic and decide you don't like it, you can buy another. If you start on a podcast hosting platform and you realize you don't like it, you can change the host, you can change show formats, and you will definitely re-record your intro at some point. You'll also likely redo your show's artwork at some point. The change is absolutely normal, so don't stress over every decision. I also want to add that finding a trusted resource to tell you what works and what doesn't versus a resource that tells you like, hey, here are 10 things to research yourself and decide what's best for you might be helpful if you're having decision fatigue around all these getting started steps, like, what mic to buy, what hosting platform to use, and that kind of stuff. So in my podcast course, I'm sharing my exact stuff. So you'll hear me share exactly what mic I use, exactly what headphones I use, what 2 recording softwares I switch between depending on if it's solo or interviews, what host I use for hosting my podcast, where I store it all, how I organize things, like all that kind of stuff. I'm telling you exactly what I use, which does not mean you have to use the same things as me, but I'm just showing you like, hey, I'm not going to just tell you a bunch of options and be like, go figure it out and let's talk for like 30 minutes about which one could be right for you. I'm just telling you what has worked for me the whole time I've had my podcast. I actually have not changed equipment the whole time. And the good news is that none of it is expensive. My equipment actually clocks in at under $100 to buy. And the software I use for recording my solo episodes on is absolutely free to use. It just comes on your computer. So that's super nice. Also, I'm in the process, just to give you some comfort around like how change is normal. I'm actually in the process right now of changing my podcast host after 4.5 years on the same host. So changing host or changing other things, again, like your artwork, your intro, your show name, even that might just happen, and that's okay. So I would just let go of that fear that you'll make the wrong decision on something and it'll be a mess to fix, because it's not going to be a mess to fix. That's just the nature of doing business. Things change over time, and you've got to be comfortable with the change and roll with it and know that you might make a decision that you want to fix later. So totally okay thing to do. And hopefully if you do join Podcast Success Blueprint, that the resources I'm sharing and the specifics of it all will really help you overcome some of that. All right, third thing. Interrupting this episode with a suggestion for the small business owners listening. Ever wonder what you should do for healthcare when you and your spouse are both self-employed, so there's no work-provided health insurance to participate in? Well, when my husband Adam joined me in the entrepreneurial job space over 4 years ago, we joined Christian Healthcare Ministries instead of getting traditional health insurance. And it was the best decision for us, especially in these years of growing and raising a family while also running multiple businesses. CHM is a health cost-sharing ministry and is a faith-based alternative to health insurance. We did tons of research before choosing CHM, and if you know me and Adam, you know we are all about doing the math when making big or small financial decisions. And even though it's not insurance, CHM shares 100% of eligible medical bills, which is more than the typical 70 or 80% of medical bills paid for by insurance companies. All sharing is determined by the CHM guidelines, which you can check out before and after joining. And for the mamas and mamas to be listening, you truly cannot find a better healthcare option for maternity care. I had a vaginal delivery and a C-section and birth center care and hospital care between my 2 pregnancies and births, and it was all 100% shared for. And outside of birth, we've had our share of emergency room visits and procedures as a family, and those costs were all shared by members at Christian Healthcare Ministries, leaving us only paying our monthly contribution. CHM is less expensive month to month than insurance, and because there's no network, you can choose your care with whichever providers best fit your family. I seriously just cannot recommend Christian Healthcare Ministries enough. You've got to check them out. Go to elizabethmccravey.com/CHM for more information. Also putting that link in the show notes, elizabethmccravey.com/CHM. Now back to the episode. That you could have as something you got to overcome. You have so much imposter syndrome and are truly just afraid of what people will think and that no one will listen. This could be the thing holding you up. It's just like so much. Like you're just feeling like you don't have what it takes. You're afraid for people you know in real life to listen. You're afraid no one will listen. It'll be a failure. And again, lots of people feel this way. This was a big thing that was said in the survey. Maybe one of the biggest things overall was like the term imposter syndrome and lack of confidence. So I just want to know, you to know a lot of people feel this way, and you are drawn to podcasting for a reason. And this might just be the thing that completely changes your business. So try it if you feel called to it. The calling is not an accident, and there's no harm in trying something. And I just want to note for you too that podcast growth often takes time. It might not be hundreds of downloads on your very first episode. Most likely that's the case for most podcasters, and that's okay. It might be 15 people who listen, and that is 15 real people that you just got in front of. And something that's cool about podcasting, I feel like we often forget, is that if you put the number of people who download your episode in a room, it would be a very full room, depending on that room size. Maybe your show will be stadium-sized level of listeners every episode, or maybe it'll be a full-on dinner party number of listeners. Either way, those are people who are listening to you and taking you with them in your life and really like learning from you directly. And that's huge. And that's the reason why podcasting can be such a big way to grow your business, whether it's a service-based business or a product-based business. It's a great way to get eyes on what you're doing and really connect with potential customers. So, okay, let's talk through this last one, this last fear and how to overcome it. So you're afraid you won't have the time or money to keep it going because you're very busy and stretched thin already in your business and life. So again, this is something that I saw come up a lot in the survey, and something I know I remember worrying about as well when I started my podcast. I just started my template shop. I was like, I got a lot of other things I also want to do. And the idea of doing something every week forever potentially is like really overwhelming because that is a big thing you're adding to your plate. So first I want to address the money aspect of podcasting, and then we're going to talk about the time. So with the money aspect of like the expenses of running a show, this is where you have to be strategic. So you should not just start a podcast because you think, hey, podcasting sounds fun. You probably don't have time for that in your business. Instead, you need to have goals with your podcast, like audience growth and business growth from it. And I personally, some people are going to say something different than this, and that's totally fine, but I don't believe you have to have a service or product to sell immediately when you start your show. However, I do think you should have a clear path towards having something to sell that is yours from your podcast. That's what's going to make it make the most sense financially. And most of you guys listening already have something to sell. And when I say something to sell, it does not have to be a product. It can also be a service that you're selling. And this is a great avenue towards selling services and products. And I think a mistake a lot of people make with their show is not thinking about the monetization of it early-ish. And when I say monetization, I do not necessarily mean putting paid ads on your show. Those are actually going to be really hard to get as a new show, especially if you're in those really low download numbers, like I was saying a moment ago, which again is fine. It's going to take time to build your show, but you're not going to be making like serious money from ads and sponsors early on. You're actually just going to be, in that case, spending tons of time on it that would probably be better spent on something else in your business. But what I do mean is that you need to have a game plan for how your content connects to your offers and some ideas for getting your listeners to potentially turn into buyers over time. For there to be a process where like someone discovers your podcast, they start listening to it. What happens next? How are you getting them to become a customer or client? And having that whole big strategy with it is going to make it make more sense financially. Something else I want to add too is you don't have to have this is actually a question I saw like within the survey results about team and podcasting, of like the fear that it's going to cost you thousands of dollars a month between the hosting, which hosting's not that expensive, you guys. So that's something real quick to know. It's more like $10 or $15 a month. But between hosting and team, that it's going to be like a big expense that you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot keep up with this. But I just want you to know that you do not have to have a huge team when you first start your podcast, or potentially ever. It can start with just you alone or just you and the editor. And there's actually an entire module in Podcast Success Blueprint where I'm talking specifically about your podcast team and all the different players you could have on your team, what you should expect to pay for different things, how they all work together, what order to hire in as you think about growing your team with your show. You guys know I love team stuff, so I'm really, really excited to record that module. But that's something just to consider as well, that it doesn't have to be that it's super, super expensive to run every month. And now let's talk real quick about the systems of it all. If you're feeling like you don't have the time to keep it going because you do feel like you're stretched thin already in your business, I totally get that. I'm running my business on part-time hours and doing this podcast every week. So what I want to say with that is that you have to have systems to make it sustainable. And podcasting does not have to take up all your time. It will for some people. If you let it, things take as long as you're going to let it take. And for me, I actually have some weeks in my business where I do not work on this podcast at all. I don't even really think about it, except for the fact that I love you guys listening. And I'm also like promoting the episodes as they come out. But then I have other weeks where I'm doing a lot of episodes at once. It's not a daily thing though, is the point, even though people are listening to your show daily, which is a really cool way to think about it. But having those systems is what it takes to make it sustainable. And I really love systems. And so that's actually one of the things when I think about like, okay, what am I most excited to teach inside Podcast Success Blueprint? The systems of podcasting is one of the things I'm really excited about, because I want to help you make podcasting and make the organization of your show something that makes sense in your life, makes sense for you and your team or yourself solo, and is something that can grow with you as you grow your shows. Just know that systems and templates and all of that is going to be a huge part of this course. Okay, so those are the 4 specific fears and how to overcome them. And I could share a lot more. Again, there's so many fears that go into what we were talking about, of creating your own stage and really putting yourself out there. But I want to recap those 4 specific fears and what the like short solution was. If you weren't like totally listening on any of that, now you're going to get a quick recap. But as I recap these, I want you to think about like which one of these resonates with you. And if you have that desire to start a podcast, how can you do something about the fear? Like how can you start working towards overcoming it? And again, you you might listen to this right now and be like, wait, you actually showed me I don't want to start a podcast right now. And that's totally fine if that's the case. But again, if you feel that draw towards it, like I did and like so many others do, then think about these fears and how you could like overcome them. So recapping them, the first one was that you're afraid you won't love it. You won't have time. The forever commitment kind of scares you, and that you'll be embarrassed if you end up quitting your show. And that's where I reminded you about like the concept of like just committing to 6 episodes and letting go of that forever aspect of it all. And just knowing that like, if you have the dream and desire for it and you're seeing clear ways it could help with your business, you'll never know unless you just try. So that's the first one. The second one is worry, just like decision fatigue, even on like making the wrong decision on something early on and then feeling like, oh, it's going to be a mess for me to fix that later. And what I want to remind you on that one, if that's your fear, is that every decision you make is changeable. Nothing is permanent in really any aspect of your business, including your podcast. So don't let that all stress you out. And also know that in the course, I'm sharing the exact stuff to really help with all that decision fatigue. The third one is that your imposter syndrome is getting to you and you are afraid that no one will listen or afraid of what people will think. And that's why I just want to say is that like the growth thing, podcast growth really does take time. This is like a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, you're going to be in it for like potentially a long time and you'll see growth over time. And know that like you are drawn to podcasting for a reason. And this might be the thing that really changes your business for you. And the final one is that you're afraid you don't have the time or the money to keep it going because you feel stretched thin already in either of those areas. And that's where I talked about how you have to be strategic with having a plan for how you are monetizing this podcast. So like start there if that's your fear. And if the time commitment is your fear, start with thinking about like, how can I have systems around this, like real systems that are going to help this not take over my entire business. And again, the course is going to help you really, really strategically in both of those areas. So that is it, friends. And I hope this episode was encouraging to you. And like, if I haven't already said it clearly, again, if you have that dream and desire to start a podcast, my answer is that you do have what it takes and that's worth trying and it's so fulfilling. And if you end up finding that something you really love, it could be the thing that boosts your confidence, gives you trust in yourself, and helps you ultimately really take your business to new heights that it would not have been able to get to without a podcast. And so to close, I want to encourage you again, check out Podcast Success Blueprint, my new course for podcasters. You can get that info at elizabethmccravey.com/PSB, short for Podcast Success Blueprint. I'm also going to put that link in the show notes. And I'll be back next week with another episode on Halloween, actually, and a completely different topic, all about having more satisfying work days, and just some like quick hacks for that. So I'll be back next week with that. Thank you guys so much for listening all the way to the end. I hope you have a great day. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast and all the way until the end. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, then I want to encourage you to check out my website where you'll find tons of resources to help you grow a profitable and sustainable business. Over on elizabethmccravey.com, you'll find free workbooks to help you figure out things like the best headline for your sales page. There's a freebie with my favorite journal prompts to start your day with, a guide on website essentials for all you coaches, and so much more. And you'll find my top business tools. Yes, I literally list out all the major ones for you on my website, and there are tons of special discounts and offers for you guys to snag as you try these products and services. You'll also find the main ways to work with me. First, through my Show It website template shop that helps you DIY your way to a strategic website for your business. These website templates are easy to use, they're gorgeously designed, and they have all the strategy I'm teaching on this podcast just woven into them, and I have a feeling you'll really love them. You'll also find my course and coaching program for designers, Booked Out Designer. In this program, I teach you everything I did to build an in-demand design business so that you can create a thriving business for yourself as a brand or website designer. So if all of that interests you, go to elizabethmccravey.com. To access those tools and free downloads, head to the tools page at elizabethmccravey.com/tools. And to see the different ways to work with me, simply click over to the Ways to Work Together page. I hope you have so much fun exploring everything over there. And don't forget that you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening so that you never miss an episode. And leaving a rating and review for the show, sharing it with a friend, sharing it on social media are all great ways for you to support this podcast. Thanks so much, and I'll see you again next week.